There is one thing that I wanted to share with you before we get into your calls, and that is the possibility that all life on Earth could end, or the majority of life on Earth could end. And so let me give you two pieces of two data points here. The first is from the journal Scientific Reports. It was published, it was reported in Science Daily on the let's see, on the 18th of November. No, on the 29th of November, yesterday. New research reveals the extinction of plant or animal species from extreme environmental change increases the risk of an extinction domino effect that could annihilate all life on Earth, they write. Researchers from Italy and Australia simulated, this was all done on a computer, right? Simulated 2,000 virtual Earths, linking together animal and plant species. And then using sophisticated modeling, they subjected these virtual Earths to environmental changes. In other words, they turned up the heat, right? They changed, they did global warming by computer. And what they found was, and I quote from their study, in the case of global warming in particular, the combination of intolerance to heat combined with co-extinctions means that 5 to 6 degrees of average warming globally is enough to wipe out most life on the planet. You will recall that there's a broad scientific consensus that if we do not do something in the next 10 or 20 years, by the year 2100, which will be in the lifetime of my grandson, in all probability, by the year 2100, everything will be dead. Everything larger than a cockroach or maybe a rat. This is what happened at in the end Permian, 250 million years ago, 254 million years ago, and it was, you know, it appears to be a methane burp toward the end as the planet gradually warmed as a result of volcanic activity in what is now Siberia. It's called the Siberian Traps. And then it reached the point where the oceans had warmed up enough, and it appears that was around 5 or 6 degrees Celsius, that they released enormous amounts of methane, and boom, it went to around 8 or 9 degrees Celsius of warming and killed everything. The oceans were sterilized, land was sterilized, and you just, you know, basically, you know, pretty much more than 90%, 95% of all life on Earth vanished. So we have already warmed in some parts of the world 2 degrees, 1.2 degrees globally, but in tropical areas it's close to 2 degrees. In the Arctic it's close to 5. And so this story by Brooke Jarvis that was in the New York Times Magazine on the 27th is titled "The Insect Apocalypse" is here. And I just wanted to run through some of the data in this. It starts out with the story of Sune Boy Rees, who is an amateur entomologist, an amateur scientist in Copenhagen, Denmark. And he was out on a bike ride with his son, and he thought, well, this is weird. It used to be when I'd ride the bike, I'd get all kinds of bugs in my face, and now there's no bugs. And so he began some research that we'll get into in just a second. They note, Brooke Jarvis notes in the article, in the United States, scientists recently found the population of monarch butterflies fell by 90% in the last 20 years, a loss of 900 million individuals. The rusty-patched bumblebee, which once lived in 28 states, dropped by 87% over the same period, which raises a deeper worry that the whole insect world may be quietly going missing, a loss of abundance that could alter the planet in unknowable ways. A German study found that, measured simply by weight, the overall abundance of flying insects in German nature preserves had decreased by 75% over just the last 27 years. If you looked at midsummer population peaks, the drop was 82%. Those of you who are longtime listeners to this program will recall back, I don't know, 6, 8, 9 years ago, something like that, a trucker called in and said, I literally drive from California to Massachusetts several times a year, and year round, and have been doing so for 20 or 30 years. And I can tell you, it used to be I used to have to stop and clean the bugs off my windshield pretty much at every truck stop, and now I can go halfway across the United States and not have to take the bugs off my windshield. And so anyhow, the fishermen, in the decades of photos of fishermen holding up their catch in the Florida Keys, the marine biologist Lauren McClanish found a perfect illustration of this phenomena, which is that you don't notice these changes because every generation is born into a different world. It's called the shifting baseline syndrome. The fish got smaller and smaller to the point where the prize catches of today were dwarfed by fish in years past that were piled up and ignored, but the smiles on the fishermen's faces stayed the same size. They didn't realize that they were actually documenting a mass die-off. In Britain, there's some really good studies. Bees, moths, butterflies, and beetles. 30 to 60% of species were found to have diminished ranges. People who studied fish found that fish had fewer mayflies to eat. Ornithologists kept finding that birds that rely on insects for food were in trouble. 8 of 10 partridges gone from French farmlands. 50 and 80% drops, respectively, for nightingales and turtle doves. These are birds that eat insects. Half of all farmland birds in Europe disappeared in just 3 decades. The birds might simply be starving. In Denmark, rollers, little eels, little owls, Eurasian hobbies, and bee eaters, these are all birds that live on insects, larger insects like beetles and dragonflies. They have abruptly disappeared. They're gone. Then came the German study. The numbers were stark, indicating a vast impoverishment of an entire insect universe, even in protected areas where insects ought to be under less stress. The speed and scale of the drop were shocking even to entomologists, who are already anxious about bees or fireflies or the cleanliness of windshields. So the German study was done in Krefeld. It's an hour drive outside of Dusseldorf. It's an extraordinary long-term, long-range, deep dive study. In 2013, Krefeld entomologists confirmed that the total number of insects caught in one nature reserve was nearly 80% lower than the same spot in 1989. They had sampled other sites, analyzed old data sets, and found similar declines, where 30 years earlier they often needed a liter bottle for a week of bug trapping. Now a half-liter bottle usually sufficed. The final study looked at 63 nature preserves representing 17,000 sampling days and found consistent declines in every kind of habitat they sampled. The flying insect, from their study, quote, "The flying insect community as a whole has been decimated over the last few decades." Journalist J.B. McKinnon cites records from recent centuries. This is now going back just 100 years, 150, 200 years at the most, right? In the North Atlantic, this is from the reports of the day, right, from 200 years ago. In the North Atlantic, a school of cods stalls a tall ship in mid-ocean, in the middle of the Atlantic. Off Sydney, Australia, a ship's captain sails from noon until sunset through pods of sperm whales as far as the eye can see. Pacific pioneers complained to the authorities that splashing salmon threatened to swamp their canoes. I remember reading Lewis and Clark's notes to Jefferson, and where they talked about the salmon were so abundant when they ran that it seemed as if you could walk across the Columbia River. Yeah, it's just, you know, we are talking about things seen by human eyes, recalled in human memories. Flocks of birds that took 3 days to fly overhead, as many as 100 blue whales in the Southern Ocean for every one that's there now. Back to today, the world's largest king penguin colony shrank by 88% over 35 years. More than 97% of the bluefish tuna who once lived in our oceans are gone. 2013 paper in Nature said that a loss of even 30% of a species' abundance can be so destabilizing that other species start going fully numerically extinct. In fact, 80% of the time, when you notice an extinction, it's the secondary creature. In other words, the bug population declines by 30, 40, 50%, and that causes the insect eater birds to starve. And so they go extinct before the bugs are extinct. This is called defaunation, the loss of individuals, the loss of abundance. Since 1970, Brooke writes, since 1970, Earth's various populations of wild animals, land animals, have lost on average 60% of their members. A study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that if you looked at the world's mammals by weight, 90% of that biomass is humans and livestock, just 4% is wild animals. We worry, Scott Hoffman Black, entomologist, says, we worry about saving the grizzly bear, but where is the grizzly without the bee that pollinates the berries it eats or the flies that sustain baby salmon? Where, for that matter, are we? When asked to imagine what would happen if insects were to disappear completely, scientists find words like collapse and Armageddon. The National Academy of Sciences did a study in Puerto Rico. They found over a 40-year period 10 to 60 times less arthropod biomass, less insect biomass. 60 times less, not 60% less. In other words, they were catching 473 milligrams of bugs. Now they're catching just 8 milligrams in a particular net in a particular way. Even scarier was this is now produced in Puerto Rico. Serious declines in the number of lizards, birds, and frogs. The paper reported, quote, a bottom-up trophic cascade and consequent collapse of the forest food web. Now, why is this? Why is this insect apocalypse happening? The guy who ran this study, his name is Dr. Lister, he says, Lister chalks up their decline to climate change, which has already increased temperatures in this part of Puerto Rico by 2 degrees Celsius since he first sampled there 30 years ago. Previous research suggested that tropical bugs will be unusually sensitive to temperature change. In November, scientists who subjected laboratory beetles to a heat wave reported that the increased temperatures made them significantly less fertile. So here we are looking out on a world that we are killing, and we are killing it with fossil fuels. And the European Union member states, they banned neonicotinoid pesticides, thinking that that was what was killing off the insects in Europe. They banned a number of the pesticides that we routinely use here in the United States. They started paying farmers to keep their fields fallow to provide insect habitats, put wild edges alongside cultivation. But the study writes, insect populations dropped anyway. So it's not the pesticides, it's not the urbanization, it's climate change. It is right now starting to kill the planet. And we need to be raising the alarm and doing so loudly. It's Anything Goes Friday. Your calls on whatever you'd like to talk about after the break. It's 18 minutes past the hour.